Before we dive in, make sure to hit that subscribe button and turn on the bell so you never miss the next jaw-dropping video. Trust me, you won't want to miss what's coming. You won't believe what happened when a woman known as Karen, the self-proclaimed enforcer of our neighborhood HOA, demanded to inspect my wife's cabin. What started as an ordinary weekend retreat quickly spiraled into one of the most shocking encounters we'd ever experienced. And trust me, you'll want to hear how this ends. It was a crisp Saturday morning when my wife, Emily, and I finally arrived at the cabin. She had been dreaming about this place for years. A quiet escape nestled in the woods, with cedar walls and wide glass windows overlooking the lake. It was her sanctuary, her happy place. After months of hard work, she had poured her heart into designing it just the way she wanted. The cabin wasn't just property. It was a piece of her soul. We had just finished unloading boxes when we heard it. A sharp, aggressive knock on the front door. Emily looked at me with confusion. We hadn't invited anyone, and most of our neighbors had been nothing but friendly since we'd purchased the land. When I opened the door, there she was, Karen. Her arms were crossed, lips pursed, eyes darting past me as though I was nothing more than a minor inconvenience. She didn't even bother with a hello. "HOA inspection," she announced, her tone sharp. "I need to see the interior of this cabin immediately." Emily stepped forward, taken aback. "Excuse me, we just moved in. There's no scheduled inspection." Karen smirked, as if she'd been waiting for that exact response. "According to HOA regulations, I have the right to ensure all new properties comply with our standards. It's procedure. If you have nothing to hide, you won't mind letting me in." The audacity of her demand left us stunned. She wasn't a government official, wasn't law enforcement. She was just a neighbor. And yet, she carried herself like a sheriff with a badge no one had given her. Emily's eyes narrowed. She wasn't one to back down, especially when it came to protecting something she loved. "This cabin is my private property," she said firmly. "You don't get to barge in here just because you feel entitled." Karen's smirk faltered, but only for a second. She leaned closer, lowering her voice to a menacing whisper. "You're new here. You don't know how things work, but you'll find out quickly. I always get my way." At that moment, I realized we weren't just dealing with a difficult neighbor. This was about power. Karen wanted control, and she had chosen Emily's cabin as her battleground. What Karen didn't know, however, was that Emily had prepared for this exact kind of confrontation. And the way she responded next? Let's just say Karen would soon regret ever knocking on our door. The silence after Karen's threat was thick, almost heavy. For a moment, it felt like the air itself held its breath, waiting for Emily's response. My wife didn't even flinch. She squared her shoulders, her voice calm but firm, the way someone speaks when they know exactly where they stand. "You can march around with your clipboard and your rules all you like," Emily said, her hand still resting firmly on the doorframe. "But you don't get to dictate what happens inside my cabin. If you want to inspect something, you can admire the outside from the public road. Beyond that line, this is our property. And unless you have a warrant signed by a judge, you're not stepping 1 foot inside." Karen blinked, clearly not expecting such a direct pushback. Most neighbors probably let her have her way, just to avoid drama. But Emily wasn't built that way. She had dealt with corporate boardrooms filled with egos bigger than Karen's. Standing her ground here was second nature. I could see Karen's face reddening, her jaw tightening. "You don't want to make this difficult," she hissed. "I can issue fines. I can escalate this to the HOA board. And trust me, they listened to me." Emily let out a small laugh. Not mocking, but almost pitying. "Fines? Over what? That I decorated my living room with quilts instead of beige curtains? That I chose cedar logs instead of stucco? Go ahead, escalate. Call whoever you want. I have the deed, the permits, and the law on my side." "What do you have?" Karen's mouth opened, then closed again. For the first time, she looked unsettled. But then, as quickly as it came, her composure snapped back into place. She jabbed a finger toward us. "This isn't over. Don't think you can just waltz into this community and ignore the rules. I'll be back. And when I come, you'd better be ready." With that, she spun on her heel and stomped down the porch steps, muttering under her breath. We watched her retreating figure disappear between the pines, her voice fading but still sharp, enough to catch phrases like "disrespectful newcomers" and "don't know who they're dealing with." I closed the door slowly, looking at Emily. "You handled that well," she exhaled, finally letting some of the tension drain away. "People like her thrive on fear. The moment you show weakness, they'll take over everything. Not this time. What we didn't know then was that Karen wasn't finished. In fact, her next move would be bigger, louder, and far more intrusive than anything we imagined. And when she returned, she wouldn't come alone." 2 days passed, and for a brief moment, life at the cabin felt peaceful again. Emily and I settled into unpacking, setting up the garden, and enjoying quiet nights by the fire. We almost convinced ourselves that Karen's outburst had been nothing more than hot air. But then, late Tuesday afternoon, the sound of crunching gravel on the driveway shattered the calm. I glanced out the window and froze. Karen was back, and she hadn't come alone. Behind her trailed 3 people, clipboards in hand, each wearing the same smug expression she did. They marched like soldiers, heads high, eyes scanning our property as though they were conducting a military inspection. Karen led the charge, her voice carrying across the yard, before she even reached the porch. "I told you this wasn't over," she called. "This is an official HOA compliance visit. Step aside. We're going inside." Emily came to the door, standing tall, her hands calmly folded in front of her. "You can't just show up with your friends and pretend you're some sort of authority," she said, her voice cool. "This is still private property. You don't have jurisdiction here." One of the clipboard men chimed in. "Ma'am, if your property doesn't meet HOA standards, you could face fines, liens, even forced modifications. Cooperation would be wise." Emily's lips curled into the faintest smile. "Wise? What's wise is knowing your limits. You have none of those powers unless I consent to your rules. And I don't. This cabin is outside the HOA's jurisdiction. Something you would have known if you'd done your homework. That stopped them cold." Karen's head snapped around, glaring at her little entourage, clearly furious they hadn't anticipated this. But Emily wasn't finished. She pulled out a folder from the table beside the door. "Here's the deed, here are the permits, and here's the county zoning map." She held them up one by one. "Notice something? My property line doesn't fall under your HOA boundaries. You have no authority here." The group exchanged uneasy glances. One of them muttered, "She's right. This section was never annexed into the HOA." Karen's face twisted with rage. She stomped her foot like a child denied candy. "I don't care what the paperwork says. This cabin doesn't fit the neighborhood aesthetic. It lowers our property values. It has to be inspected." Emily didn't raise her voice. She didn't need to. "No, Karen, you don't get to make demands here. This is my home, and if you keep trespassing, I'll treat it like trespassing." For the first time, Karen looked rattled. But instead of backing down, she did something far more dramatic. She pulled out her phone. "Fine," she spat. "If you won't listen to me, maybe you'll listen to the police." When Karen dialed 911 right there on our porch, I almost laughed in disbelief. Calling the police over a cabin inspection? It was absurd. But Karen's voice was sharp, laced with fake urgency as she reported us like criminals. "Hello, yes, I need officers dispatched immediately," she said loudly enough for us to hear. "These people are refusing to comply with HOA regulations. They're hostile and threatening me. I fear for my safety." Emily's jaw tightened. She whispered to me, "Notice how she's performing for the phone? She wants them to show up primed against us." And sure enough, less than 20 minutes later, 2 patrol cars rolled up our driveway. The blue and red lights reflected off the trees, painting the cabin walls in streaks of color. Karen's face lit up with smug triumph. The officers stepped out, calm but cautious. "Afternoon," one said, approaching. "We got a call about a disturbance." Before we could speak, Karen leapt in front of them. "Yes, thank goodness you're here. These people are refusing a lawful inspection. They're hiding violations inside their cabin, probably illegal modifications. They screamed at me and threatened me when I tried to enforce community standards. The performance was Oscar-worthy. She clutched her chest as if Emily had lunged at her with a weapon, but Emily didn't so much as flinch. She calmly handed the officer the folder she had shown Karen earlier. "Officer, everything you need is here. Our deed, county zoning maps, permits. This property is outside the HOA's jurisdiction. Karen has no legal authority here, and she and her friends are trespassing." The officer flipped through the documents, his brow furrowing. "This seems pretty clear," he murmured. "Your property isn't under HOA control." Karen's face drained of color. "What? No! That can't be right. Check again!" "She's lying. She forged those papers." The officer looked unimpressed. "Ma'am, these are certified county records. Unless you have legal documents that override them, there's nothing here for us to enforce." Emily finally spoke directly to Karen, her voice calm but razor-sharp. "You've harassed us, brought strangers onto our property, and now you've wasted police resources. That's trespassing and filing a false report. Do you really want to keep digging this hole?" Karen sputtered, words failing her for the first time since this ordeal began. The officers turned toward her, one raising an eyebrow. "Ma'am, if you continue making calls like this without cause, you could be facing charges." The smug confidence that had carried Karen all this way was crumbling before our eyes. But instead of retreating gracefully, she doubled down, her anger boiling, over into a decision that would seal her regret once and for all. Karen's face turned crimson as the officer's words sank in. Her carefully crafted facade of control was collapsing, and she knew it. But instead of admitting defeat, she did the one thing that guaranteed her downfall. She lashed out. "You don't understand," she screeched, pointing at Emily. "She thinks she's above the rules, above the community. If you don't stop her, everything we've built will fall apart. I won't let this cabin ruin my neighborhood." The officers exchanged looks. One of them sighed, clearly tired of her theatrics. "Ma'am, this is their private property. You and your associates need to leave. Now." But Karen didn't budge. She stomped back up onto our porch, trying to shove past me toward the door. "If you won't do your job," she snapped at the officers, "then I will. Someone has to uphold standards around here." That was it. The line had been crossed. The officer stepped forward, firmly intercepting her before she could reach the door. "That's enough," he said, his voice sharp. "You've been warned. Leave the property immediately, or we'll remove you ourselves." For a second, Karen looked like she might actually fight him on it. Her fists clenched, her body trembling with rage. But then she caught sight of Emily. Calm, steady, unshaken, and something in her broke. The realization that she'd lost, completely and publicly, hit her like a blow. Her entourage, the clipboard-carrying neighbors who had once marched proudly at her side, were now backing away, muttering excuses. "We didn't know." "She told us," one said, retreating toward their cars. Within minutes, they were gone, leaving Karen standing alone on the porch. The officer gave her one last chance. "Ma'am, leave, now!" Karen's lips curled, her voice a hiss. "This isn't over. You'll regret this." But even she didn't sound convinced anymore. She turned sharply on her heel, storming down the driveway until she disappeared into the trees. When the patrol cars finally left, silence settled over the cabin again. Emily leaned against the door frame, letting out a long breath. "Well," she said softly, "that's one way to break in the new place." I laughed, though part of me still buzzed with adrenaline. "You were incredible." "She didn't stand a chance against you." Emily's eyes sparkled with quiet pride. "Bullies like her only win if you let them. And I don't let them." In the weeks that followed, word spread quickly around the neighborhood. People stopped by, not to complain, but to thank us. Karen had been tormenting others for years, and no one had dared to challenge her until now. Her grip on the HOA crumbled, her influence fading as more neighbors realized they didn't have to bow to her demands. As for us, the cabin remained exactly as Emily had envisioned it. Peaceful, private, and ours. And Karen? She learned the hard way that some doors should never be knocked on.